Last week in Jamaica's Parliament, the spotlight was firmly on the Honourable Floyd Green, Minister of Agriculture, during a heated parliamentary exchange that has since sparked serious public discussion. During the sitting on January 20th, 2026, Minister Green faced intense questioning from the opposition, particularly from Damion Crawford, MP for North West St. Catherine. What followed was a robust and uncompromising parliamentary debate, touching on issues that directly affect mining communities, accountability, and governance in Jamaica. The questions were direct, sharp, and at times uncomfortable, and for many viewers, this exchange represents exactly what parliamentary oversight in a democracy should look like. Let's take a look at the question that put Minister Floyd Green under pressure. Footage courtesy of PBCJ.
Is the minister aware that there has been anecdotal evidence that there has been greater roof damage in bauxite areas relative to the wind than in most other
Parliament
areas
Broadcasting
that had
Commission of
greater
Jamaica.
Wind forces from the hurricane? That multiple roof loss have been attributed to weakened roofs due to the bauxite dust, acid rain, and the rusting that has been caused in these bauxite areas due to the dust. Is the minister also aware that this dust and acid rain have also affected agricultural output? And I would love to piggyback on the member from St. Anne, who indicated that there's ownership of extreme numbers of acres, but is it possible to know the output from these entities? Because while it is, we may say, 7 acres under production, is it possible for us to know the output from these areas? Because it sounds as if many are just holding lands and not necessarily producing on these properties that they claim that they own. Finally, is the minister aware that there have been a cease on bauxite, they used to call it dust money, in many communities, that the bauxite company has unilaterally decided not to pay the dust contribution? I heard the unfortunate number of $67 a day in South Manchester per family, and yet still was jealous of the fact when it compares to $0 a day in Northwest St. Catherine, a unilateral decision taken by the bauxite company. Finally, is the minister aware that the employment practices of these bauxite companies would have been deemed by any reasonable employee of the Ministry of Labor to be unfair practices, and also a focus on contracts and subcontracted labor into many of these plants, reducing what was once the benefits through labor and earning from the bauxite companies? Can the minister therefore provide information if there has been any engagement from any arm of government to have more fair practices within these areas? If I may be allowed, Minister, I'll also ask, is the minister aware that there has been many damage to houses due to blasting from bauxite mining, and also from the facilitation of bauxite mining? So many of these roads to the mines in their preparation have also caused for great damage, for which that's I'm wondering if he's aware. And further aware that the damage to these areas have been refused compensation, with the bauxite entities unwilling even to visit when informed by many of these communities, like Wandibolas, about damage to their houses due to blasting and other activities such as those. We would want to know if the minister is such aware.
As you just saw, those were strong and bruising questions from Damion Crawford, and it's fair to say they reflected real concerns coming from affected communities. The questions raised were valid, pointed, and grounded in issues Jamaicans care deeply about: transparency, environmental impact, and whether the government is truly listening to people on the ground. This was not political theatre for the sake of it. These were serious parliamentary questions that demanded equally serious answers. Now, let's turn to Minister Floyd Green's response.
All right, let me thank the members. I will start by saying I recognize the speaker gave a lot of latitude. I will try as far as possible to answer the questions posed, especially those that touch and concern directly the subjects that I had responded on. Some of the questions my colleague from Northwest said, Catherine, do not. But there are matters that you have raised that I would suggest that you put into writing and send to me. Right? So the matters in relation to damage, the matters in relation to dust, the matters in relation to claims around acid rain and claims around greater roof damage, those are things that I would suggest you pen to me so I can ask the teams to investigate, because those would require investigation. Again, I would not have gotten a brief about the employment practices, but what I do know that our bauxite company still provides one of the most stable employment in the country. And oftentimes when you go and tour these companies, you meet people who have been there for decades, quite frankly. And the bauxite industry is still the highest average paying sector in our country. So it still is critical, especially in relation to gainful employment. And then when you speak about the amount of independent contractors, those who do the mining, those who do the trucking, the ecosystem around bauxite mining is significant in relation to our economic activity. I will answer this directly, even though it was not directly raised, but I was unaware of any difficulty in having meetings with JBI, right? And that we will fix. So already prior to this, I had said in the last time we had a conversation around bauxite that I have asked, that I plan to convene a meeting with all the members of parliament from bauxite areas, and I've directed the JBI to do so. So when we have that meeting, which I expect to have within the next 2 weeks, because I also want to speak about the bauxite community development program that we're going into, that some of these issues will be raised and will be dealt with. The member from Southeast St. Anne, again, the consistency of payment in relation to the dust is not a matter that has come to me before, right? I would again ask seriously that you pen a letter to me around it. These things have to be recorded. Remember how our bauxite industry is. We are dealing with private companies. So it is good that the minister, to embark on these conversations, has some evidentiary backing to say that this is the situation. And I can't think of a higher person than the representative in the area to literally say these complaints have come in and you want this matter to be resolved immediately. You did ask, and it does fall within, about challenges in relation to enforcement. And there has been, I guess, challenges over the years. I think it's very hard to speak on administrations before. But what I will say is that now our focus is on enforcement, right? And that I do believe that in some of these areas, and I will go into it in responding to some of the things from the member from South Manchester, in some of these areas, we should have been doing better enforcement. And if we had been doing better enforcement, we would not be having some of these challenges. And these challenges, quite frankly, undermine the industry in total. So sometimes it may be seen that enforcement actually, as I have said to the players in the industry, enforcement helps the industry because the terms that have been set are for the protection of the greater good. And I think that is important. I will deal with the formal lease arrangements. So some of the questions are repeated, but I'll deal with it one time. The member from Northwest Manchester, again, some of the questions are outside the scope, but very good questions, right? Definitely, the issue of Hall Road was raised in terms of the amount of land, and the bauxite companies are to stick to a schedule in relation to preparing haul roads to bring bauxite. And I have said to the Jamaica Bauxite Institute and the commissioner who interacts that there has to be extenuating circumstances where that is not adhered to. Now, some of the companies have had some extenuated circumstances. I'll speak a little bit about that. But with that said, I will look into the matter of what is happening regarding maintenance on the public thoroughfare. Now, clearly that would cross over into another ministry, but having raised it, I think it is something worthy of looking into. Let me deal with the matter of lands in general. I have mandated that we are to do a full audit of the bauxite lands that are either have been mined and have been reclaimed but have not been handed back to government. Because there is to be another step, because those lands are to be returned to the Commissioner of Lands. So I've asked for an audit to be done on that one. Two, the lands that there are no plans to mine, that are still under the purview of the bauxite company, that they have already determined for multiple reasons that it would not be economical to mine those lands, that those lands again be handed back to the government so that we can put them to productive use. And that would be across all the areas, North, West St. Catherine, across all the areas, Southeast St. Anne. I had that discussion with the company in Southeast St. Anne. And that also means that where the land has not yet been handed back to the member from South Manchester, one of his questions, where the bauxite company is still in possession, but based on their mining plan, they are not going to reach to that area for another 5-10 years. And that area is occupied by farmers, or can be occupied by farmers, that they enter into lease arrangements with these farmers, or allow us through the Agri-Invest Corporation to enter into leases with the company, and then we can sublease to the farmers so that they have some tenureship. That's very, very important. That's something that we're pushing for this year, because it's critical, as was raised from the member from Southeast St. Anne, that these farmers have tenureship, that they can be able to go to the bank or go to their institutions and say that this is their property that they are farming. We have reaped some success over the last decade, I would say, where we've gotten the companies to not only give back some of the land, but to work with us to establish greenhouse clusters on some of these lands. And those clusters have gone very well. And under the BCDP, which we will outline to you as members of Parliament, we are looking to establish some more of those clusters. And sometimes strategically, as we did in content, we said to the bauxite company, do not restore this pit, because we're going to use this pit as a water catchment area. And then that makes sense because it works in terms of helping the farmers and the greenhouse. The lack of access, oh, well, let's talk about that. You had asked about the reason for delay. Member from Northwest Manchester, I don't remember what was the delay question in relation to, but oh, so I have to be I wouldn't want to proffer a reason on behalf of the company for their delay. The approach that I have taken and that I have said to the Commissioner of Mines is that we're embarking now on a zero tolerance approach in relation to the time for certification, right? So, as you would have seen, those 70 hectares should have been rehabilitated and certified by the end of 2025, and we have already written to the company in that regard. It is for the company to say to us if there were extenuated circumstances that made that impossible, and then we would have to consider it, right? But I wouldn't want to hazard any guesses in that regard. The member from South Manchester, he got the greatest latitude, and made a lot of comments before he went to the questions. I will check in relation to whether the 25,000 is a one-off fee per hectare or whether that's an annual fee. I don't have that information at hand, but I will find out. The reality is, as difficult as it may sound, oftentimes the mines have not been fully depleted because of these issues. So it goes back to another thing that I've said to the companies. In keeping with your mining plan, even though you may not plan to go into an area for another 10 years, you may need to take steps to secure that land. Because a lot of these lands are privately owned now. They're not government owned, right? The government owned good bauxite land, most of the companies already have. So a lot of these lands are privately owned. So there's nothing stopping a private owner from building, from investing, which sends up the cost of acquisition. So sometimes when the companies are ready to go to acquire, they have real challenges with the private owners to acquire that property. And we do try to mediate as far as possible, but that's as far as we go, because you do understand it's two private individuals, company and the person, looking at what they think is in their best interest. The other thing that is a real issue, bauxite has different qualities, and in order to ensure that you're maximizing productivity and also profitability, there is some blending that happens. So sometimes you have to leave what is a lower grade bauxite until you reach another area with a higher grade bauxite and blend it to create what you're trying to get out, especially in relation to when you're processing aluminum. With that said, I will ask the Commissioner of Mines to look into the length of time that these areas have remained unmined. And as was indicated in the answer, some of that work has started. In terms of a I spoke about the formal lease program, and we're going to move to that. In terms of a standardization of the claims, sometimes it's a bit challenging. I hear you. What we have standardized is the assessment through RADA, right? So RADA will provide that assessment support. But oftentimes, on both sides, oftentimes the farmer also wants to be able to negotiate, right? And the farmer also may have a view in relation to value. It's one of the areas, one of the things I had said in one of my presentations, we've started a process of training agricultural valuators. It's not something that we have a lot of. Somebody that is trained to value and has a certification to value agricultural loss, right? That would make it a little bit easier for people to agree. And as you know, having served in rural constituencies, farmers have very strong views about the value of their crops, right? But definitely in terms of the assessment, the standardization through RADA. The community council, and I'll come back to the community council, the resettlement, but you are right. And I'm happy you raised the point, because it does make the point that a lot of these issues were prior to this government, right? That a lot of the people were resettled under previous administrations and nothing were done to get the titles for them. We are fixing it. So the question was asked about a task force. There is a land titling committee that I've assigned Minister Witter to chair, and they meet, and the last meeting was held with members of the NLA, and we are now exploring whether we can use a systematic land titling to quickly resolve some of these issues. You have some issues as you raise, some estate issues, but the people are still occupying. Systematic can make it easier to treat with that. Now, clearly, there's a cost, and we are looking at maybe a shared model, because at the end of the day, we think it's in the country's interest for these people to get their titles. So we are having those discussions, and I will share more when we meet. I won't speak to the adequacy of the dust compensation, right? Normally, my understanding is that a lot of these are agreements reached. with the community councils, and a lot that you said, the member from South Manchester, speaks to one of the last points you made, that the community councils are not functioning as they should for a number of different reasons. So I had already asked for a study to be done on the community councils by JBI, and we are looking to see how we can revamp the community councils. The first thing is that MPs have to be included in the consultation framework. And the member from Northwest St. Catherine raised that as an issue that should be non-negotiable, right? So we are going to come with a revamp of the community council. We will again put it before the MPs to get some buy-in before we go to the companies. But the reality, and remember I grew up in a bauxite area where the community council was very strong, very active, but like most, they have waned over the years. And it's very, very important.
Minister Floyd Green appeared to start off a bit shaky, which is understandable given the intensity of the questioning. However, as his response continued, he found his footing and delivered what many would consider a solid and confident defense of his position. He provided reassurances, outlined ongoing work, and signaled that several of the concerns raised are actively being addressed or will be taken forward. Overall, this exchange was a textbook example of a strong parliamentary debate, tough questions from the opposition, and substantive responses from the government. It's the kind of debate that mining communities and the wider Jamaican public expect to see when critical national issues are on the table. If we want to drive Jamaica forward, we need more debates like this, robust, transparent, and focused on results, not just politics. What did you think about the questions raised? Did Minister Floyd Green do enough to address the concerns? If you enjoyed this breakdown of the Jamaica Parliament debate, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.